Welcome to the Pioneer Podcast. This is Ernst Roots, and today we are talking about a very particular issue in South Africa and within the South African context, an issue that a lot of people are concerned about, with regard to which there are many questions, and an issue that a lot of people have felt or experienced, if not directly, then the consequences thereof in some way. But it is also an issue that, even though it is a very particular or a very specific issue, is also symbolic of some of the bigger picture issues that South Africa is currently grappling with. And the issue I'm talking about is the crisis in veterinary sciences. And so I'm joined today by Gert Steyn, the Managing Director of the South African Veterinary Association. Welcome, and thank you very much for joining us on this platform.
Thanks, Ernst. Thanks very much for having us.
So maybe a good way to start is just a reference to my experience. I know very little about veterinary sciences. When I was a student at the University of Pretoria, I was on the student council, and I remember being on the student council, having somewhat access to university documents and issues with regard to which students or student representatives should provide input. And it became very clear very quickly that veterinary science is somewhat of a contentious issue. There's somewhat of an issue that needs to be dealt with, and it's difficult to pinpoint. And one aspect of it is, my experience is, it's not so much a managerial problem or perhaps a leadership problem, maybe it's that as well, but it's much more what you might call a policy problem, or sort of the environment in which this field has to operate. So maybe with this vague introduction, let me just add, you also recently published a report that raises some very serious problems about the state of veterinary sciences in South Africa. And as I mentioned in the introduction, it's somewhat symbolic of some of the other problems or the bigger picture issues that we are dealing with in South Africa. So perhaps we can start with you responding to my vague concern about veterinary science, and also just giving us just shedding some light on this report that was issued.
Thanks, Ernst. I think let's start off to say that we're in the unfortunate situation that we only have one veterinary faculty in South Africa. And that is part of the University of Pretoria, and it's situated near Onderstepoort. They're only able to take in around 200 students at first year level. Which by itself creates a massive pressure point for this course being substantially oversubscribed from a year-to-year basis. As a result, also, after 6 years of training, there's only roughly about between 150 and 170 students that qualify as veterinarians. So yes, there's significant pressure on the system to create more veterinarians, because as part of what our research has shown, is that we have a shortage of vets in South Africa. And this is only from a single veterinary faculty. So we'll probably discuss this a little bit later as to how we can deal with some of these issues, what our potential recommendations are, where we can go. But a lot of these are bracketed into short, medium, and longer term solutions. But yes, I think maybe if you'll allow me, Ernst, there's a small little analogy for the general public out there. Recently, I was asked to go speak at Onderstepoort to prospective students in the veterinary space, and I was grappling with what is the message I need to bring across, because what I've realized is so many individuals out there have a misunderstanding about the role of a veterinarian in a country. We tend to think of vets as being pet-oriented, cats and dogs and other pets, maybe even going as far as horses. But we don't necessarily appreciate the role that a vet plays in food safety and security.
In agriculture.
In agriculture. So the example is as follows. If you were to picture a plate of lasagna, the lasagna dish, which you all know, it has a number of elements to it. First being the bolognese sauce, which consists of mince. Mm-hmm. Where does this mince come from? That animal comes from a farm which had a vet that was involved there. Might have been from a feedlot where a vet was involved. That animal ultimately went to an abattoir where a vet was involved. From a quality assurance perspective, at packaging and processing, there was a vet involved. If you look at the pasta sheets, pasta consists of flour and eggs. Eggs produced by chickens, where a vet is involved. If you look at the bechamel or the white sauce, the bechamel sauce consists of flour, butter and milk. Once again, butter, dairy, cows, veterinary involved at the bechamel sauce level. Looking at the topping, you've got cheese, back to dairy again for veterinarians. And if you want to be fancy, you'll go towards a water buffalo mozzarella. You might even have a wildlife vet involved there. So a single dish, every single element, you had to have a vet involved to get that to your plate. Mm. Now, when I thought about this, when I created this, it brought myself to light as well, because it just makes sense. And this is why we need to protect the veterinary industry in South Africa and grow the veterinary industry, because it has tentacles inside agriculture, which is one of our largest gross domestic product contributors. And it relates to our cost. Inflation is a massive issue in South Africa. If our vets aren't able to look after agriculture in the rural spaces, the cost of production increases, the cost of a plate of food increases, and an already depressed economy will suffer more. This is at a macro level.
So on one hand, what you're saying is that if the world if the veterinarian world collapses, food security collapses and the economy as a result thereof. But then we have this strange situation in South Africa where I've been involved with many conversations with friends my age when I was younger and young people now who did brilliantly in high school, who say they want to become vets, and the typical response is that's impossible. Rather go and study something else. And I mean, I know I have many friends and colleagues and people who I know who, for example, are trying very hard to get in. And now we have this strange problem where there's this massive shortage of vets. And it seems to me that there are a massive pool of people, or if not massive, at least a substantial pool of people who want to become vets and who I would argue have some very good marks in high school. They should be able to become vets. But there's this bottleneck in terms of training. And so it seems to me that the simple solution then would be to say, well, we just need to have a bigger school for veterinary sciences. But I think it does seem that the problem is a bit deeper than that. There's a lot of concerns about political interference and racial quotas and things like that. So can you just remark on this bottleneck, and why isn't it as simple as just opening up the bottleneck?
I think the issue is, as I stated earlier, there's only one veterinary school. And from a capacity perspective, they can only take in 200. Because the facility is as such that you need to have a veterinary hospital linked to it. Staffing, the physical size of the facility cannot accommodate anymore. So there's already plans afoot to open up a second veterinary faculty. However, that being said, our research has indicated to us that there are concerns about staffing a second veterinary faculty, since we are already short-staffed on our current veterinary faculty. So that creates a problem. Now, if we can maybe start talking about this, so we need to get more vets into the country. For the short term, we can't produce them ourselves. That's not possible. We have a problem of retaining our vets in the country because we've identified a substantial portion of the younger vets wanting to leave South Africa for a number of reasons, which we'll probably get to at a later stage. So what's the alternative? We need to attract vets into the country. Okay. Now, this is one of the most wonderful countries one can live in for those of the listeners or viewers that haven't been here. From a biodiversity perspective, from a climate perspective, from a people perspective, it's a fantastic place to live in. So to make South Africa attractable for foreign veterinarians to come and work here, there's just a number of very small steps that needs to be taken to allow them to do so. Okay, so in part of our current structure, any vet in South Africa that completes their qualification are required to complete what's called the compulsory community services year, where they are placed inside state clinics around the country. They need to work for that year in the state clinic, and then they become a fully qualified veterinarian that can register and practice in South Africa. However, if you are a foreign veterinarian, it becomes a lot more tricky. Okay, but what happens then is, firstly, you need to if you're not one of several universities in the world that has a reciprocal agreement with our South African Veterinary Council, you will need to write an exam. Okay? And I agree with that completely. We can't just let any veterinarian in the country trained anywhere come and work in a critical space such as food safety and security.
Yeah, quality control.
We need to maintain the standards. I mean, honest to put, is one of the most highly regarded qualifications in the world, and we need to maintain the standards of vets that we allow to work in our industry. However, even if they've completed that, the regulations as it stands at the moment, we understand that's being looked at, requires that foreign vet to also do a compulsory community services year, which does not make sense because these posts are not necessarily available. These posts are funded by government. We know the funding is not available for that. So,
can I just say it's the same problem with medicine, with young doctors that have to go through that process, and
exactly.
It creates a bottleneck.
Exactly the same problem. So if we're able to, for instance, there are a number of universities in the UK that South Africa has a reciprocal agreement with. So if you qualify in the UK, you can just come and work in South Africa. But the compulsory community services here is the blockage at the moment, which can be removed at a stroke of a pen. It does not make sense. Okay, so if that happens, we can market ourselves as a place for young vets to comply their trade and work on a variety of different species. I mean, if you were to think about what it is in South Africa that we offer in terms of wildlife, in terms of a variety of production animals, in terms of domesticated animals, we're second to none. And this will make us attractive. But we need to do that first. And I'm very sure that if we do that, we can make a difference to the current situation of vets in the country. Even if we were to open a second veterinary faculty, this will take a number of years. Just to construct the facility, to staff the facility, you're looking at 5 to 8, maybe even 10 years, which doesn't alleviate the short-term problem.
On the assumption that there's capital to do that.
On the assumption that there's capital to do so, yes. On the assumption that there's capital to do so. So we need to firstly look at our short-term solution is to make it easier for anybody out there to come work in South Africa. Fortunately, veterinarians are on the critical skills list. We've been removed 2 years ago. We had to put up a little bit of a fight, quite a bit of a fight, to get them back on the critical skills list. But vets are back on the critical skills list. So obtaining a visa is now also significantly easier to be able to come work in South Africa.
So I'm very happy that we're already starting to touch on solutions. And I want to get to that, but I think for people watching this, especially from outside of South Africa who don't really know the extent of the problem, let's talk about the problem for a moment to enable us to go to the solution. And so one of the major concerns that you've expressed in this report is staggering numbers of vets in South Africa who are either currently in the process of immigrating or who are seriously considering immigrating. What are these numbers? How serious is this problem?
In terms of the numbers, I can tell you that roughly for the younger age group between 25 and 30, you're looking at more or less 57 to 58% of them either begun the process of immigrating or be seriously considering that they will immigrate within the next 5 years. And that creates a problem. As I said earlier, we only produce 150 to 170 vets a year. Now, the South African Veterinary Council, if you plan to immigrate and want to practice as a vet overseas, you need to approach the Veterinary Council and they will issue with what's called a letter of good standing. That means that your educational requirements are up to standard. You have met all the requirements to be able to practice as a vet in South Africa, and you're a fully paid up registry. You can then take that letter anywhere in the world and, depending on the country's requirements, be able to practice as a vet there. Remember I said we produce 150 vets a year. In 2023, the Veterinary Council issued 170 letters of good standing. So we were down by 20 vets already in 2023. That excludes vets that retire from the profession, vets that unfortunately may have passed away, vets that have decided to leave the profession altogether, for a variety of reasons. So we anticipate that we are increasing our shortage as we sit here.
So we're shrinking.
We're shrinking. Now, based on the statistics by the Veterinary Council, there's roughly about 3,500 vets. If you add specialists, about 3,700 vets registered in South Africa. Now, I place emphasis on the word registered because what we've seen is that vets will immigrate, but they will maintain their registration in South Africa. They'll pay the registration fees and keep their continuous professional development points up to standard, for in case they want to come back. It's just easier to do that than to try and re-register when you come back. So although that figure says 3,700 vets, we don't know how many of them are actually in South Africa.
It's certainly lower than that in reality.
Certainly lower than that in reality.
So why are vets leaving the country in such high numbers?
Unfortunately, the vets are leaving the country in high numbers based on the same reason that most people in the country leave South Africa: economic reasons and safety and security. If I were to touch on economic reasons, one of the reasons we've identified as to why the young vets are leaving South Africa is the cost of veterinary science is probably one of the most expensive courses that you can study, not only here but internationally as well, because you have to maintain a hospital, you have to maintain a farm full of animals, stock it with drugs, stock it with specialists. So it's expensive to study veterinary science. So the likelihood that you will exit your degree after 6 years carrying a debt of between 1.2 and 1.5 million rands, that equates to more or less $150,000 is significant. Now, you have to pay that debt off. Now, the starting salary of veterinarians, once they've exited the compulsory community service program, is in most cases not enough to even service the debt, which makes them forced, or make them feel forced to go look for more lucrative opportunities overseas. Mm-hmm. So that is the reality of the matter. Safety and security reasons, I don't think we have to spend too much time on that. We know that South Africa is one of the most dangerous places in the world to live in. Certain areas of the country, maybe let's just stress that, our murder rate is one of the highest in the world, which does provide one with a little bit of a sense of discomfort, especially if you practice in the rural areas, farming communities, etc. So that is unfortunately also one of the reasons that we see our vets leaving.
Mm-hmm. But there's also somewhat of a spiral, it seems, because there are too few vets, but the customers don't necessarily have the appreciation for this reality, and so there's increased pressure on the existing vets, and to act as if there are enough vets, so to service a bigger customer base as if the customer base isn't too big, and so that's also an issue that seems to be increasing. Is this frustration, either with regard to the vets or frustration among the vets? And so, again, it's a bit of a spiral, because now as vets are leaving, it's just worsening the situation. So is this something that you've experienced as well?
Aris, you're absolutely correct. We've got a variety of examples. One example I can provide you with is a vet in northern KwaZulu-Natal. This vet was part of a 5-man practice 10 years ago, which was able to service a diverse community in terms of the domesticated animals and production animals. That practice has now dwindled to a single vet. This vet is 80 years old. He gets up at 4:30 in the morning, starts practicing at 5, and then only comes back 10:30 at night and restarts all over again. Posts that have been advertised in rural areas, our data indicates, our research that we've done, indicated to us that if you've advertised a post in a rural area for a veterinarian, 67% of those posts are still vacant after 12 months. It's incredible. It just makes it so difficult. However, and this proves the shortage of vets in the country, or the disparity between supply and demand. If you are a vet looking for a job anywhere in the country, you will find employment 92% of the time within 1 month of looking for a job. So you can work anywhere. It's available for you if you want to go work there, but the practices are struggling to get vets. We've heard of a practice in a large town in the Western Cape, Beaufort West. The last veterinary practice there closed down now because they weren't able to find vets to go work there, which is a problem, which is a significant problem.
And to what extent is there a problem with access to drugs and supplies that vets need?
Our industry, our pharmaceutical industry, the animal health pharmaceutical industry is strong and robust. So in terms of access to medication, a number of companies operate in South Africa. There are no problems in terms of access.
Okay, so if we start moving towards solutions now, the easy solution to any problem is to throw money at it, to say we need more money. And I'm sure that that's certainly part of the solution as far as this is concerned, if we're talking about building another school to study veterinary science and so forth. But other than just having more money, maybe we should start with the government. What ought the government to be doing to contribute to solving this problem?
I think one of the difficult areas, I think it's prevalent in the human medical space as well, is that when our young vets start working in the compulsory community services here, they go towards the state clinic, all around, everywhere in the country. Now, having been in a very safe space in an academic institution for the last 6 years, and being placed in a very rural area with very limited support, tends to disillusion the young vets. Where in the state clinics they might find that they've got struggling with access to drugs, struggling with access to consumables, struggling with access in terms of support for them as a young vet. And that creates, I believe, a bit of a disillusionment among the young vets. Now, this is where the South African Veterinary Association has stepped in, identifying this as an issue, to provide a mentoring program for the compulsory community services vets, where we link a private practice veterinarian who is practicing in the same area as the state clinic with the compulsory community services vet. And the purpose there is from a emotional support, self-confidence support, access to maybe locum work, if that is applicable in the case, to be able to train up their clinical skills, and just to gain confidence in the ways that they're doing things. And what we've also seen now, having run this program for 3 years, is that once the relationship builds between the mentee and the mentor, the mentee is a lot less disillusioned and actually likely to go work for the mentor following the mentorship program. So we've retained a vet by just providing them with a safe and comfortable space for that year, where they don't consider immigration as being the only solution following their first year of employment.
So as you know, at the Solidarity Movement, where I'm involved, we have this slogan, Ons Self. We will do it ourselves. And so part of the reason why we got to this is because of the type of frustrations that you are expressing here, is that, whether we're talking about crime or education or any of these things, that the government ought to be doing certain things, and we're tax-paying citizens, so we have a right to demand of them to do this. But that's the theoretical side of it. In reality, very often it doesn't happen. And so we need to recognize that it's good to follow a double strategy. On the one hand, pressuring the government, but then on the other hand saying, but what can we do? Let's accept for the sake of the argument that the government's not going to come to the table. What do you think vets can do, and what do you think local communities can do to respond to this problem appropriately?
I think one of the first things that a local community can do is to appreciate the value of a veterinarian. There's quite often in the media, and unfortunately the pet insurance industry likes to make the statement that the veterinarians' bills are extraordinary. But the one thing that they tend to forget is that the cost of capital of setting up a veterinary practice is significant. If you were, as a human being, were to gain access to your general physician, your GP, with a condition, what will the GP do? The GP will do a minor assessment or a diagnosis of you. The GP will send you to a blood laboratory to be able to do blood tests. He or she might send you to a radiologist to do scans, X-rays, and following that, there might be a procedure that needs to take place at the hospital. At the hospital where the procedure takes place, you will receive an invoice from the hospital itself, from the general anaesthetist as well as the surgeon. So looking at a health intervention on a human space, the invoice and the cost is fragmented amongst a large number of services. But to be able to run a veterinary surgery, you need to have your own blood laboratory. You need to have your own X-ray machines, and even as far as CAT scans or MRIs, ultrasounds, you need to have your own surgical theatre facility to be able to provide this service. And this all comes packaged into one bill.
So it's much more expensive than a law firm.
It looks to be much more expensive, but you have to appreciate that the level of skill and training that the vets have received is of a standard similar to that of human doctors. Some would argue maybe even more intrusive or more comprehensive, where human doctors study to diagnose and treat one animal, and veterinarians study to treat a multitude of animals. And we often do not see or perceive the value of the veterinary service that is provided. And I think that's one of the things that communities out there can start looking at, especially if I think about the lasagna principle that I gave a little bit earlier, that a number of veterinarians was involved to make sure that the animal protein that you are consuming is of a high and safe quality, disregarding the fact that this veterinarian has also looked after a furry family member for a number of years as well. So the value perception of veterinarians, I believe, need to change, where it needs to be appreciated that a vet provides a service and that service costs money. And that's unfortunately what it is. From a government perspective, I think the support of the compulsory community services veterinarians could be better in terms of ensuring that the appropriate drugs, appropriate support, appropriate technology, appropriate consumables are available and readily available at all the state clinics, which will make the lives of the veterinarian a lot easier, which will alleviate the pressure and the disillusionment that this young vet might suffer at the hands of having to work for the government for that year. And ultimately, the animal health in the population that state clinic is serving will also improve, which is a benefit to South Africa as a whole.
Perhaps to close off the conversation, what are some of the bigger picture lessons that we can learn from this? In other words, what could have been done to prevent this, or what should have been put in place, sort of from a macro level, principles that are not necessarily only applicable to veterinary sciences, but to other areas or fields as well?
I think it's the principle of human capital, Ernst. The moment that we as a country start realizing that we're spending taxpayers' money on training highly valued, internationally highly valued professionals. I'm not talking only about vets here. I'm talking about veterinarians. I'm talking about human doctors. I'm talking about engineers, quantity surveyors, law to a lesser degree because it's difficult to transfer into other countries. But any of those sciences, taxpayers' money was spent on developing them. So we must, like any asset, you need to maintain an asset. And you need to look after the asset because that asset produces you revenue. And we need to get that perspective, that human capital. If we start looking after human capital, the country will thrive. And I don't believe we are looking after human capital. And it comes back to what you said earlier about the government spending money and we're not necessarily getting what we should. It relates back to the training as well, because government subsidies are being spent on training. And before those individuals can start paying it back by paying taxes, they leave.
So I would say that it seems to me then that there are two levels of appreciation that we need to encourage among people. One would be appreciation for the hard sciences. It seems, and maybe I'm running the risk of being overly critical, but it seems as if there's this romantic view of being a philosopher or a journalist or the humanity fields, and those fields are important, but there's almost an underappreciation for the necessity of the fields you mentioned, engineering, science, and so forth. And if we lose that, we're going to have serious problems. We're going to have a nation, this is obviously the extreme, but a nation of philosophers and journalists and thinkers and talkers, but no one actually going out and building things or helping people to get healthy and so forth. But then there's also I would say, not just an appreciation for the role of veterinary science, but perhaps a bit more broadly speaking, an appreciation for agriculture. Because as you mentioned, when people think about vets, they tend to think about cats and dogs without recognizing how dependent we are on veterinary sciences. And so there's this strange phenomenon in the world now where people are starting to, in a sense, look down on agriculture and say, well, almost this strange perception that if you want food, you can just buy it in the shop without necessarily appreciating where that comes from. So would you say that appreciating agriculture and appreciating hard sciences is an important part of the communal response to as far as the solution is concerned?
Ernst, you're absolutely correct. I would like to add one more, though, and that is to say that I think in South Africa there's an overemphasis on tertiary education. high-level tertiary education. Yes, in terms of the hard sciences, the lawyers, engineers, doctors, veterinarians, quantity surveyors, at the risk of leaving anything out, you can add to it. But to get a university degree is almost overvalued. Looking at what our economy needs, we need fitters and turners, we need plumbers, we need electricians. These are all employment opportunities where you can be self-employed. You've got a skill and you can be self-employed and start up your own business. But for some reason, society tends to look down on those individuals. And we as a country needs to promote those areas, because these are work opportunities where you can become a professional immediately following your training with limited capital, can start up your own business and start contributing to the economy. Yes, we will always need journalists. We will always need studies in the humanity. But I think that there's a skewness to it at this point in time. You know, we need to encourage our children when they leave school that there are other opportunities that are available. That is not to be looked down upon. That will provide a service to the economy at a benefit to the individual. And I think there's space for us to consider that a little bit more honestly.
Yeah. Well, if I can abuse this platform to say, I think in a certain sense, this is what's great about the work that Solidarity is doing in terms of organizing sectors of the working community, the employed community, to be able to take a stance. And also what I especially appreciate about what an institution like Soltech is doing. Because if I understand you correctly, you're not saying that education isn't important. No. You are saying that education and training is particularly important, but we should broaden our perspective in terms of what one could study and what is necessary. And what I really appreciate about an institution like Soltech is its artisan training, but there's, in a certain sense, there's an element of prestige. If someone tells you, I studied at Soltech, it's an impressive thing to say. And people and it's artisan training. So, and it's the type of occupations that you've mentioned. And I think if we can get these type of occupations, including then veterinary science and vets and so forth, to have a bigger appreciation within society for the role that these are playing, I think we're a long way down the road.
Indeed.
Yeah. Gert Steyn, thank you very much. Thank you for coming in.
Thanks for having me, Ernst.
It's wonderful talking to you and listening to you and listening about the problem, but then also exchanging some ideas about how we might fix this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ernst. If you support this podcast and the work that we are involved with as the Afrikaner Foundation and the broader solidarity movement in South Africa, I want to encourage you to become a more active supporter. You can do this first and foremost by subscribing to our various social media channels, by leaving a comment and sharing what you have seen. But other than that, also by making a small monthly contribution to the work that we are doing through the Afrikaner Foundation's website, or by making a once-off donation. Links in the description.